Peterson, do you have any comments on the Nazi presence at your protest?
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Why the rage, bruh? You're doing well, but you're a mean, mad white man.
The presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protest, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like Nazis.
If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this. And that's that. Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable. I mean, I'm not making the case that I haven't had advantages in my life and disadvantages in my life like most people. You don't know anything about my background or where I came from. It doesn't matter to you because fundamentally I'm a mean white man. That's a hell of a thing to say in a debate. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues.
Except you haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
Ha, gotcha.
Rule 8 is tell the truth or at least don't lie.
Love him or hate him, it is an undeniable fact that Jordan Peterson has had a significant amount of influence over the life of countless people all around the globe. I am Korean myself, and it's really easy to see Jordan Peterson's books laid out at the main section of the library, even in Korea. That just shows how much influence he has had not only in America and the English-speaking countries, but also worldwide. He has had a huge impact on my personal life as well, especially during my early 20s. His lectures, his lessons, and advices really spoke to me, and as a young man, his videos gave me clear directions and guidelines for how to live my life in a more fulfilling and meaningful way. I know some of you might hate him, perhaps, and most likely because of his, political views and opinions, and I'm aware that he's a controversial figure, but regardless of your personal political views and opinions, I think it would be beneficial for you to really try to look beyond the noise and distractions and try to get the essence of what perhaps he's trying to teach and the values that he upholds in his life. So in this video, I want to share 5 lessons Jordan Peterson has shared with us over the years and try to explain why having these guidelines in your life will make you wiser and will help you make better decisions for your future. All right, lesson number 1 is learn to speak and articulate.
The reason that you come to university to be educated is because there is nothing more powerful than someone who is articulate and who can think and speak. It's power. And I mean power of the best sort. It's authority and influence and respectability and competence. And so you come to university to craft your highest skill. And your highest skill is to be found in articulated speech. And if you're a master at formulating your arguments, you win everything. And better than that, when you win everything, everyone around you wins too. Because to transform yourself into, let's consider your transformation into something approximating the logos. It means you shine a light on the whole world. Well, there's nothing more exciting to do than that. There's nothing better you can possibly do.
I always considered myself as an inarticulate person. Ever since I was a kid, I wasn't much of a talker, and I just decided at some point that I'm simply not really good at this talking thing, so I should just stop trying and, work on things that I'm actually good at, perhaps, instead. Later on, I realized that not being able to speak is becoming one of the biggest obstacles in my life, and that I'm missing out on the greatest opportunities simply because I did not have the ability to speak effectively and articulate effectively. This realization was especially highlighted listening to people like Jordan Peterson, and he was a living proof of the power and influence a person can have by having the ability to speak and articulate. So when you read the Bible, in John chapter 1 verse 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Also in Hebrews chapter 4 verse 12, it says, For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. I'm not saying the word we speak rivals that of God's, of course, but it is evident in the Bible that words have tremendous amount of power and strength within them. This is why I think tremendous amount of influence and reward is given to those that are able to harness the power of words and articulation. All right, lesson number 2 is take on responsibility.
The other thing I've noticed is that I've been talking a lot to the crowds that I've been talking to, not about rights, but about responsibility, right? Because you can't have the bloody conversation. What are you doing? You can't have the conversation about rights without the conversation about responsibility, because your rights are my responsibility. That's what they are, technically. So you just can't have only half of that discussion. And we're only having half that discussion. And the question is, well, what the hell are you leaving out if you only have that half of the discussion? And the answer is, well, you're leaving out responsibility. And then the question is, well, what are you leaving out if you're leaving out responsibility? And the answer might be, well, maybe you're leaving out the meaning of life. That's what it looks like to me. It's like, here you are, suffering away. What makes it worthwhile? Rights? You know, you're completely out. You have no idea what it's almost impossible to describe how bad an idea that is. Responsibility. That's what gives life meaning. It's like lift a load. Then you can tolerate yourself, right? Because look at, you're useless, easily hurt, easily killed. Why should you have any self-respect? That's the story of the fall. Pick something up and carry it. Make it heavy enough so that you can think, yeah, well, useless as I am, at least I could move that from there to there. Well, what's really cool about that is that when I talk to these crowds about this, the men's eyes light up. And that's very, like, I've seen that phenomenon because I've been talking about this mythological material for a long time. And I can see when I'm watching crowds, people, you know, their eyebrows lift, their eyes light up because I put something together for them. And that's what mythological stories do. So I'm not taking responsibility for that. That's what the stories do. So I say the story and people go click, 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 you know, and their eyes light up. But this responsibility thing, that's a whole new order of this, is that young men are so hungry for that, it is unbelievable.
Yeah, so responsibility is not a sexy word, not at all, you know. It doesn't sound as appealing as perhaps passion or chasing your dreams or freedom. But it is an essential part of life, and without responsibility, we tend to drift and we lose focus and purpose if we fail to adopt some form of responsibility in our lives. As I grow older, the meaning and concept of responsibility and the importance of having one is becoming more and more real and prominent. I used to run from responsibility. I thought freedom and, you know, the absence of responsibility is much more exciting, and taking on responsibility felt like a dreadful, boring chore of some kind. Especially since the adults around me, such as, you know, my parents and teachers, always used to tell me how important it is to be a responsible person. I never quite understood why, you know. Why should I strive to become someone responsible? What does it even mean to be a responsible person? It sounded so boring and stressful. All I could come up with on why I needed to be responsible was because people can trust me when they make me, you know, do stuff that I don't necessarily want to do. And then they would allow me to do more important stuff that I don't necessarily want to do. And perhaps by, you know, repeating this, I'll be able to climb the hierarchy and become a leader and so on. That was the only reason for me to adopt some kind of responsibility. But as Jordan Peterson points out, responsibility is the driving force that gives us meaning in our lives, especially when it's a responsibility that we take on voluntarily. Try to imagine a life without any sort of responsibility. You know, it may sound wonderful at first on a surface level, but once you really start thinking through, you'll easily find out what a mess of a life that would be for not only for yourself, but also everyone around you. First of all, what would you do without responsibility? Play all day, sleep around and party around till your heart's content? And then what? Freedom without limits often ends up to be depressing and meaningless. Imagine a world without responsibilities, parents not taking care of their children, teachers not teaching, engineers and workers only working when they feel like it. Everything will turn into chaos and destruction. They say, forget your responsibilities and do whatever you want. They say, just be free. Do they actually understand what they mean by free? Or is it simply a fragment of their imagination? So, take on responsibility voluntarily and take on as much as you can bear. And your responsibilities will someday give you meaning and purpose in your life. Lesson number 3 is compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
This is from 12 Rules for Life. Rule 4 is compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
Yes.
Because you need to have a hierarchy of improvement. You need to be aiming for something. And that means you're going to be lesser than people who've already attained along that dimension.
Yes.
And that can give rise to envy. So the question is, who should you defeat in the final analysis? And the answer is you should defeat your former self. You should be constantly trying to do that. And you're the right control for yourself too, because you're the one who's had all your advantages and disadvantages. And so if you want to compete fairly with someone, then you should be competing with you. And it is the case, and this is what we were talking about too with regards to the self-improvement of the fighter, is, well, if you're improving yourself, then what you are doing is competing with your lesser self. And then you might also ask, well, what is that lesser self? And that lesser self would be resentful and bitter and aggressive and vengeance-seeking and all of those things that go along with having a negative moral character. And those are things that interfere with your ability to progress as you move forward through life. So it's very necessary to understand that this is why, I've been stressing this idea of personal responsibility. It's like, well, personal responsibility is to compete with yourself, is to be slightly better than yourself the next day.
Yes.
And better in some way that you can actually manage. And that's humility. It's right. Like, well, I'm a flawed person and I've got all my problems. Could I be as good as person X? It's like not the right question. The right question is, could you be slightly better tomorrow than your currently flawed self? And the answer to that is, if you have enough humility to set the bar properly low, then you could be better tomorrow than you are today. Because what you also have to do is you have to say, well, here's all my flaws and my insufficiencies, and the best that someone that flawed and insufficient could do to improve and actually do it is this. And that's not worth going out in the street and celebrating with placards, It's like, well, this is why I tell people to clean their room. So you're not going to brag to someone that you did that. But someone as insufficient as you might be able to manage it. And that means you actually are on the pathway to self-improvement and you're transcending your former self. And you might say, well, what's the right way of being in the world, if there is such a thing? And it's not acting according to a set of rules. It's attempting continually to transcend the flawed thing that you currently are. And what's so interesting about that is that the meaning in life is to be found in that pursuit.
I had a habit of comparing myself to everyone around me, especially to those that have already achieved the dream and the goals that I am trying to achieve. For example, I want to be a YouTuber, and looking at all the YouTubers that have already made it with millions of subscribers, it made my, little efforts and stupid videos seem so insignificant and stupid. My standard of content was way beyond what I was able to create because I was comparing myself with YouTubers that have already been creating for years and years ahead of me. But I realized that that's the stupidest thing I could do to myself. I wasn't using the right comparisons. All I had to do and all I could do was try to be a better version of who I was yesterday. I shouldn't compare my videos to, MKBHD or Ali Abdaal. I should compare what I made today versus what I made a week ago. How did I improve? What can I fix? What can I make better than the previous videos that I made? How can I tell a better story? These are the things that I should have focused on. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do right now. Even if this video tanks and gets 0 views, doesn't matter. Focus on incremental improvements. And even if I never become the million subscribers YouTuber, I would have grown in my capacity to grow, to endure, to learn. So as Jordan Peterson suggests, only compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. All right, lesson number 4 is clarify what you want.
Give yourself the benefit of the doubt.
even though it's hard, given your appalling, pathetic, ignorant, lazy nature, and all the things you could be that you aren't. It's hard to give yourself the benefit of the doubt, but you could say, well, would it really be so terrible if my life wasn't miserable? Would it be so terrible if I got what I wanted and needed, especially if I was doing that in the best possible way? And that has to be a serious question, right? You can't just tell yourself this. You have to open yourself up to the possibility that that might be true. Then you can say to yourself, well, if I could have what I needed and wanted in a manner that would be best for me, and you can imagine that takes a fair bit of orientation to get that question right, then what would my life look like? And that's a frightening question. People generally are loath to ask themselves that question because there's a couple of reasons. One is maybe you feel you don't deserve it. Well, another is you don't know that that's what you should do because we're so badly taught that this idea is generally not presented to people, which is just absolutely appalling beyond belief as far as I can tell. But then there's more impediments too, because one of the things people do to buttress themselves against failure is to never let themselves really gain clarity about what they need and want. Let's say you try something, but you only do it half-heartedly. And then you fail, and you think, well, I didn't really fail because, I held a bunch back in reserve, and so I didn't get what I wanted, but maybe had I been all in, I would have. And so you don't have to upbraid yourself too much for the failure. Now, it's a catastrophic way to live, to sit on the fence and to not commit, because instead of risking the possibility of failure, you engage in what's essentially the absolute certainty of failure. Because if you want something worthwhile and difficult, which you probably do if you want to have an adventure and go somewhere, then what's the chance you're going to get it if you're halfway in? It's like, if you can, then you didn't aim high enough, obviously, and that's not going to be exciting or engaging. And so if you're actually pursuing something that would motivate you maximally, you can't be halfway in. But that sort of protects you against failure because you can tell yourself, well, if I tried, I could have done it. It's like, you tell yourself that 200 times and your life's over. And so I would seriously not recommend that.
If I tried, I could have done it. That is one of the scariest things that I can imagine I will say in my deathbed. To die with regrets. To die thinking I never gave life everything I got. But in reality, that is exactly the way I have conducted myself when it comes to my dreams and aspirations. I want to be successful, but it's cringe to try because what if I fail? Then I would have made a fool of myself and everyone around me will mock me. That is the story we often tell ourselves. So we never clarify exactly what we want. When others ask us, what's your dream? What do you want to become? We often give answers like, I'm kind of trying this and that. Maybe someday I want to, become a content creator, but it's just a hobby. We give excuses to ourselves and to others, and we never try truly commit because once we really commit, just like Jordan Peterson says, there's actual possibility of a really bad and concrete failure. But to achieve anything worthwhile, it inevitably takes tremendous amount of effort and work. And unless you have a clear vision of what you want, how can you ever plan out what kind of efforts you must put in and what actions you must take? A vague and general goal can only be backed by vague and general actions. So we must not be afraid of specifying exactly what we want, even if it means being exposed to the possibility of failure and embarrassment. Let's all think through our lives, our missions, and our dreams and try to come up with a clear statement of what we want. Let's run after it, wholeheartedly and give it all we've got. We should not be afraid of failure because that's only a part of being a human being. All right, last lesson. Lesson number 5 is sacrifice.
And so, but the dichotomy that you're talking about is very tricky because there's a sacrificial element in maturation, right? You have to sacrifice the pluripotentiality of childhood for the actuality of a frame. And the question is, well, why would you do that? Well, one reason is It happens to you whether you do it or not. You can either choose your damn limitation, or you can let it take you unaware when you're 30, or even worse, when you're 40. And then that is not a happy day. And I see people like this, and I think it's more and more common in our culture because people can put off maturity without suffering an immediate penalty. But all that happens is the penalty accrues, and then when it finally hits, it just wallops you. Because when you're 25, you can be an idiot. It's no problem. Even when you're out in a job search, it's like, well, you don't have any experience and you're kind of clueless. It's, yeah, you're young, it's no problem. That's what young people are like, but they're full of potential. Okay, well, now you're the same person at 30. It's like people aren't so thrilled about you at that point. It's like, what the hell have you been doing for the last 10 years? Well, I'm just as clueless as I was when I was 22. It's, yeah, but you're not 22. You're an old infant, right? And that's an ugly thing, an old infant. So part of the reason you choose your damn sacrifice, because the sacrifice is inevitable, but at least you get to choose it.
Sacrifice is also not a sexy word, but without sacrifice, there's minimal or no return in your life, especially as you age. Everything that is worthwhile in your life that holds a certain value is a direct or indirect consequence of somebody's sacrifice, either your own or someone else's. But we often forget this fact and act as if everything was happenstance. The food you're eating, the money you have, the house you own, the knowledge you possess are all fruits of sacrifices you or someone else has made in the past. One of the greatest assets that I personally own is that I can speak and write in 5 different languages. But how did I learn all these languages? Of course, it was because I sacrificed hours and hours, months and years of my time to learn them. Nothing in this world is free of charge. You have to make sacrifices to attain them. So you can't have everything. You can't play all day, every day and expect to have a greater future. It just doesn't work that way. You gotta choose your sacrifice, and you have to ask yourself, am I willing to sacrifice the now for the future? Or am I willing to sacrifice the future for my present convenience? Of course, it is your choice, but the consequence and the result of that is no longer in your hands. So let's choose our sacrifices wisely. All right, so these lessons and concepts are actually very simple. They're not complicated, and they have been around for ages. But the problem is that we forget, and these simple but very powerful fundamentals are overlooked easily. Everybody chases fame, money, wealth, power, and these things, but we fail to cultivate the necessary values and characters within us that allow us to actually grow and mature as an individual. So I think Jordan Peterson and his lessons are of great value to our modern society, especially for the young ones like us who are searching for a direction and purpose. All right, see you in my next video.